Welcome to the latest episode of Ed Influence. I'm Nick McKenzie from Brown Jacobson, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Jonny Searle, coach at PCP and founder of One Stop Advisors, who work and support SMEs. Thank you, Jonny, for joining me today. I wanted to start by inviting you to tell me a story from your life that would give me a picture of who you are.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, it's interesting trying to think of think of um, of uh, of that. So I picked a story that's somewhat leader related, and basically I did a lot of rowing when I was younger, and I still do some rowing coaching. I was doing some rowing coaching sort of recently, and it's a story of being on a training camp with a big group of rowers, two eights full of rowers, and I set them a load of work to do. I was in the launch driving along behind them, and it was an incredibly hot day in France. And it was three 20-minute pieces side by side, which I think probably even when I was young, I would have found a really tough session. And for various reasons, they'd gone off really hard. And as time was going on, I was seeing they were fading and they were struggling. And they finished the last piece. They did this last 20 minutes sort of absolutely flat out. And I'm feeling I've got kind of goosebumps now. They just stopped in the water and they were just totally and utterly broken. I could just see them all sort of lying over their oars, and I just thought that was too much. And sorry, now I'm emotional. And so I think I suppose that the point is I tried to think, why does that resonate for me as a leader? And I think it was something around this idea I probably have of myself as a sort of caring leader, thinking about people in my team, and there's obviously something to try to achieve as a goal and a purpose, but also there's people there. And I think the sort of window into how, if you're leading, people will do things because you're the leader, because perhaps they trust you, that you know what you're doing. You encourage them to do it, and I thought probably that day they trusted me that the work was the right type of work, and I probably had put too much work on the program for the weather, for the level of experience they were, for their level of fitness. And I suppose and I think that's a bit of a pattern, I think, for leaders everywhere. You don't maybe always realize the influence you have over people, and they will try and do what they perhaps think they're supposed to because of your position, but it's not always apparent to you as a leader that might be going on, that you'd think someone would say, "I'm absolutely exhausted. Can we stop the work?" for example, or something like that. But that I don't know why it just kind of landed me. Perhaps it was quite an emotional moment in them, just seeing all these people who were, a bit sort of broken.
I'm I'm curious what happened next. Did you talk to them about that observation you had?
Yeah, that's a good question. No, what happens, I sat in the launch feeling, I mean, I was really emotional because I could just see them all across the river, and we were still. I think that we were still some 10 minutes from the boathouse. So I think at the time I probably just gave them the time to recover. Like all these things, they are athletes, and they were fit, so there was time to recover a bit and paddle back. But I didn't. But I think it was definitely a bit of a tipping point in terms of how I set programs for the group. Just to be more mindful that there's responsibility. I think particularly as a sports coach, if people sort of always it's physical and mental well-being, but the same in any environment, people you're responsible for. I suppose. Uh, yeah, I suppose it's just that care for people. So no, I didn't talk to them about it, but I think I have mentioned it to some of them from time to time, that moment. And now, it's interesting because someone will say, "Look, we want to be good, we want to be good athletes, and being pushed and being stretched is part of that." And so I think the point was really, for some it was okay to do that, and for some it wasn't. There was quite a mixed level of ability in the group, and checking that people have signed up for the type of leadership you might be offering. Perhaps that's the lesson. And I think I've obviously done the sport. I think you see it particularly in sport, but I think it goes across the board. Checking in that people, have signed up for the journey, and the way we're going to go on it. I used to sometimes I would talk to groups, I did sort of talks to groups. And I remember doing a sort of talk about winning the Olympics and goal setting and this sort of stuff to a group once. And someone said, I don't really want to be that good. I'm just quite happy, coming in and sort of doing my job. And at the time I was much younger, and I couldn't quite register with that. But I think it was a good reminder that we've all got different aspirations and different levels we want to commit, different priorities in life and different amounts of energy, and
Mm.
being mindful that the people in your team are in that place.
So I think you said a moment ago, part of it was it sort of challenge your own view of yourself as a leader and how you saw yourself as a leader. How would you describe your leadership philosophy and how has it evolved?
Yeah. I suppose I don't think of myself as a leader in a permanent state. I think we can all lead from time to time. I think that's one of the points, that there might be someone with a title or a role they've been given, but that I'll park that for a moment. I suppose for me, leadership is about working with a group of people to achieve some sort of goal, purpose, we'll call it. And the bit I would add is, and also enjoying the journey to the goal. So I suppose for me, that would be broadly this, trying to do something with a group of people, and try to enjoy the journey and the moment.
So you're a sports coach and business coach, and I looked on your website and it had a quote on there where it says, "We see the world not as it is, but as we are," and it's very prominent on your website. And I was curious why that's important to you.
I think it gets back to some of the stuff I might have said earlier, that we're all different. I mean, and I guess that's what I found most interesting about doing the executive, the coaching work, is the chance to listen to people, to learn about people, and just to realize how different everyone is. And you can't believe how different people are. Well, you can because you coach, but most people, I think, they think they're broadly some sort of version of themselves. Perhaps that's not quite true, but many people appear to think someone is either a slightly better or slightly worse version than themselves. That's if I hear people talk, sometimes that's the impression I get, as opposed to what I see, and is that um, everyone is a great version of themselves or something of that nature. Or everyone is, everyone is unique and have different things that are important to them. Different, um, yeah, different things are important to them. Different skills, different behaviors, different preferences. So I suppose when I'm working with people as a coach, even, I will always start with what do you like doing? What's important to you? And what do you think broadly, I wouldn't say you're good at? And if we can get those things out, then people are most likely to end up in some sort of happy place, I suppose, doing things they're good at, and things they like doing.
Could you perhaps tell me about someone who's helped you become the person today you are today, and yeah, who's really influenced you and how? Is there anyone?
That is an interesting question. Who has influenced me? I actually feel sorry. This is I'm not just asking a question. It feels like I'm in a sort of uh, job interview and someone's asked me a tricky question. I'm fumbling around to get out. I think I get influenced by people all the time. I when I was working, I worked for a long time as a sort of general counsel in business, and I remember listing all the people I sort of admired, respected, and had positions in the business, and writing down three things about them. I had a book and I had three things about them that I thought were part of what made them good at what they did. So I don't know. It was some particular guy. He had he was really top on. He knew all about technology. He was a great networker. He was sort of clear communicator, for example. So I might have had that. And I don't know, someone on my team who was super diligent, um, knew the law and was really sort of friendly. I don't know. Just so I had this sort of map of I don't know what you call it, positive, useful traits. But I think they're all not all. So many behaviors are context specific. Um, I'm not sure if I could say one person is the
Hmm.
person who who influences. I find myself influenced by people all the time, and just when I'm coaching people, actually, that's a good option. Often I'll listen to someone, think, oh, yeah, that's interesting, and I'll try and take some of that or do some of that.
Thinking back to some of those traits you jotted down, was there any that particularly surprised you when you observed it and thought about it?
Um, I suppose the ones that surprise me sometimes are the the ones that I'm probably perhaps less keen on as traits, that yet people still progress with those traits, and I suppose that can be challenging when perhaps you see people who are have, let's call it, achieved things that were probably important to them, but the way they've achieved them um, has been with behaviours that I probably wouldn't be myself.
Yeah. And so, speaking of yourself, then, what traits do you think are important in a leader?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if I think, it's not a bit about those particular. I worked for about 10 years with one manager, and I was quite a good friend with it. Actually, the chair. So there was another senior person in the business at the time as well, and both similar sort of traits. I would say, broadly, pretty straightforward people. You could have a conversation and not have to be guarded. Just I think in psychological terms, secure. Secure and stable. So just that's fairly straightforward. Fun. Kind of enjoyable people to be around. Bit of a sense of humour. That for me is really important. Treated everyone with respect. I think regardless of, I like people who. I don't need to detail. I coached someone, and I just noticed they quite a senior person in business, and they chatted to the receptionist as we went out. And I thought the businesses I've coached, perhaps people wouldn't be chatting and really, I mean, genuinely chatting to the receptionist as well as the most important client. So I think that idea of treating everyone with respect, um, being smart, sort of basic, you know, intelligence seems to help with many leadership roles. I guess it's a bit of problem solving, listening to people. I think again, it's a hard thing to do as a leader. Sometimes people are a bit nervous, a bit scared to come forward. You don't realise that. I've certainly had that from time to time. Found out that people didn't want to speak up, and I sort of felt I was quite approachable. So I think to really work hard at listening been something that I noticed. And I suppose perhaps to one of my points today, I think someone who's sort of focused on the goal, focused on what it is we're trying to achieve um, without broadly advancing themselves. I think to trust that the purpose here is to move forwards, and even occasionally to, I'd say that's great leadership when you help the team and you move towards the goal, and it actually might even cost you personally. And always, so not always, sometimes interested at how leaders sometimes will put themselves first and almost drop the goal a bit and drop the people, uh, so that they advance. And I think I would say the opposite of that is something that I would aspire to, perhaps. Yeah.
You've, I believe you've recently co-authored a book called The Trainee Coach Handbook, and I understand you wrote a chapter exploring the importance of relationship between coach and client. I think you're perhaps talking about some of that in some of those attributes of, to have a positive relationship from coaching. And clearly there may be people listening that are coaches and coach, but there's others that will use coaching in their relationships, in their management and leadership. Um, what are some key things that you've learned about the importance of getting a positive outcome from that relationship, whether it's a formal coaching or more of a quasi coaching relationship?
Yeah, so the chapter was, I guess it was a twofold. It was a bit about the importance of, let's say, broadly having a working relationship. So someone said to me, and I thought it was quite good, that broadly we could group sort of people in the world into perhaps three categories, and they might be thirds for some people, they might be not that proportion, but broadly some people we get on really well with, and it's easy for us to be with, and and then to analyze why that is. There's a whole bunch of people. We just meet them and immediately we connect and we go, well, and then there's a sort of middle ground of people that we can probably work with, professionally and in tasks, and that's fine. And there's a sort of third group that are just going to be really, really hard to work with. And I suppose to some extent in coaching, that's what you're doing in the chemistry section. I suppose you're trying to make sure you're at least in one of those first two groups. And I imagine you'll be aware if you're in the third group, it's just going to be a bit hard. And it's not, when I started off, I used to think, oh, I'm not a very good coach because not everyone wants to work with me. After a while, I started to realize this is just how life is. There's a group of people that are, it's just a bit not quite the same connection. So that, I think that's one element of just trying to work out what's going on sometimes and say, okay, well, these are people it's just going to take a lot of energy for us to get on. That's one element. And then the other part of the chapter was around using what's going on in the moment and how you feel as part of a coaching tool. And I think that is something, I guess, more empathetic, or naturally more empathetic people perhaps would do anyway. It's probably a bit more of a learned thing for me, also empathy and picking up what's going on. But the idea is sometimes you're coaching someone and you can feel they're feeling what's going on for them, or I might feel a bit anxious, and then I think, okay, so is that me or is that you? Or I feel sad. That's the thing I notice a lot. Sometimes someone will tell me a story of their career or something that's going on. It's a career change. I do a lot with career change, and I feel incredibly sad. Happened yesterday. Just I can really feel that, and the person's quite impassive about it because perhaps they've locked it away or they haven't thought through. And then sometimes being able to then bring that and say, well, just how sad I feel when I hear that story. Perhaps that allows them to put it into perspective and think, yeah, you're right, or how annoyed I might feel, or something like that. I can bring the emotion that I'm feeling. So that's that sort of feeling what you're feeling, and equally, if you find a lot of people, I do it as well. I find myself annoyed with a colleague or something. You stop and think, why is this? Is it because they're telling me something I don't understand? Sometimes that can be what it is. Someone's telling me something, I get annoyed. I'm not annoyed with them. I'm annoyed that I'm struggling to understand what they're talking about, and that can help, I think, as a leader, rather than stop. When someone comes in and you're in a hurry and you get annoyed, what are you actually annoyed about?
Yeah, and suppose to talk about those feelings that you see and feel can be quite challenging. So it's one level of challenge. So the first question and the story you gave me, and then you named the emotion you were saying what was going on. Although I could sense something before you named it, but you made it easier for me by naming it then. But you then described a story of sometimes where you're feeling something, but someone's producing quite passive. It can take a bit of bravery, can it, to name it and try and pull it out into the conversation.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't have done it when I was younger. I mean, I'm really grateful that I do the coaching work and I've done so much coaching work, and maybe also just, I don't know, maybe mature in life and realize that, okay, a bunch of people are going to, I know that if I, with workplace, I said something like I'm feeling a bit sad, a whole bunch of people are going to judge you and say, well, you shouldn't say you're sad or happy, or there's, professionalism sometimes comes with a sense of, I don't know, you shouldn't talk about emotions or even be emotional or have emotions, and that I'm happy that I work in spaces that I can perhaps be a bit more, let the emotions out in some ways and talk about them and be with people who are happy to do that, not in a way that we spend all day doing that, but it's just possible to, because I think by naming these things, it does help from professional. I'm talking about the task, if people understand how others are feeling and responding. Yeah.
So can we talk about using emotions, I suppose? Can we talk about resilience for a moment? I'm wondering, when things get tough for you, how do you go about responding to that pressure? What have you learned on resilience, both yourself and perhaps with all the coaching, the team coaching, the business executive coaching you've done? What have you learned about resilience?
Yeah, I mean, I talk to groups, talk to individuals about resilience, and I suppose some of it comes back to probably the stuff I learned early on, through all the sport I did, and suppose I think of resilience as our ability to stay in this sort of peak performance area. So I guess some people will be familiar with this sort of curve where you have pressure goes across the bottom, and then there's a sort of curve that goes up. And if we have no pressure at all, then we're not doing anything. We're just lying about, and I guess eventually that can be stressful, and we won't achieve anything at all. Even getting up to eat, you could say that's the lowest end of it. When there's no pressure, we just lie about. And then there's a middle ground where we've got a bit of pressure and we're feeling some pressure and we're performing well and we're getting things done and they're probably in quite a happy state. And then there's a bit where there's too much pressure going on. And then people start to get anxious. And if they're under pressure for too long, they get stressed and then they get health, both mental and physical health problems. So I suppose when I talk about being resilient, I'm thinking about how do I stay in the peak bit in the middle. And I think that's probably something I've had from quite an early age. I'm generally quite good at that, I suppose, in terms of getting energy. Actually, that's not true. When I was younger, I didn't sleep enough at all. When I was working in rowing, it was killing me. I'd get up 5, 6 hours a night, and I was tired. I think almost the whole time. So I think that now for me is the number one thing: getting enough sleep. It's pretty primal. In fact, I studied biology. Not that you need to study biology to know that we're animals and we need to look after ourselves. But sleep is the probably number one thing. And for me, I suppose probably having a bit of support network around and 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 trying to use others and involve others in whether that's just in helping me relax or for tasks that might cause me too much stress to do them or bring too much pressure. So I suppose um, a sort of support network, sleep and a support network, I suppose, are two pretty fundamental bits of resilience. I think I do sort of think within reason, if you sleep 8 hours a night, you can carry on for a long time doing stuff that can be quite tough. It may be a bit of a miserable existence, but you can at least function in that way. And if there's a sort of bit of an outlet to be able to talk and have human contact, then you remain in what's I suppose broadly a natural animal state as mammals to be in groups and to be with others.
And for you, what do you do to help get you to? You said when you were younger, you were 5, 6 hours. You're there about 8 hours. I'm assuming is what you try to do now. How do you find you organise things to make that happen?
Broadly, how do I stay in some state of peak performance? Yeah. I suppose one is the basic physical part of gathering some energy. So try to get within reason 7, 8 hours sleep most nights. So that's one element. Try to spend as much time as possible with people I really care about, and that I find really has always been a theme of my life. I guess doing things with people I love, people I care about. If I look back across my life, and when I rode, it was with my brother. When I was working with teams, people I'm close to, and then in my home life as well, to have someone really supportive around. I think that who I enjoy being with is a big part of it. And then beyond that, exercise is quite important for me. I realised that might sound a bit weird, but in COVID, although for many people, I think clearly COVID was a terrible time. For me, I was at home a lot. I was at home. Everyone was at home. But I had a rowing machine in the house and the ability to train 4 or 5 times a week. I was as fit as I'd been for many, many years, and that I hadn't realised. I think having had a life of sport, just how important fitness is. So that's probably a third element that is almost a bit hidden because it's always been part of my life. So being fit is a big thing for me. But what I've noticed over time is it's different for everyone. I did a talk to a group once. So I gave through all the things, exercise and yoga and mindfulness and rest and nutrition, and I asked the group what they did, and the guy said he really liked making cupcakes for colleagues because it was a purposeful thing. There was an end to it, and it was a giving, and it was a community thing. So I guess it's that's what I find interesting. I think people should find everyone really, if they really stop and think what will get me at my best, they'll know what it is. And yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. One of the reasons I was curious about that I find myself having more conversations recently with people that are just trying to get back to some of the basics of those self-care things because it's easy to let them get out of kilter a bit. Um, so could we talk about collaboration? So you've been part of and you've worked in a number of high performing sports teams, business teams. I was just wondering what have you learned along the way about collaboration?
Um, what have I learned about collaboration? God, that's that's funny. I normally like a conceptual question. I'm now going to think how I begin to answer. What have I learned about collaboration? Um, I think lots of people talk about collaboration. I think sometimes structures mitigate slightly against collaboration. I think that's probably the thing. And perhaps as a leader, I think, goodness, a bit about leadership, then I think ensuring your structures encourage collaboration, because I guess you sometimes see it in professional services, for example, people talk about let's all collaborate, and then people get rewarded for their individual performance. Perhaps it's, if you measure people's individual delivery of client billing, for example, that sometimes happens, and don't get credit when you bring work to someone else. You're talking about collaboration, but you're actually rewarding non-collaboration, for example. That sometimes happens. I mean, interesting. I just founded this sort of consultants or advisory company working with SMEs, and in setting it up, I've really tried to create it as almost like to maximize collaboration. So there's half a dozen or so C-suite experts, but they're very much they're marketing, the sales, they're finance, they have different skill sets. So they shouldn't be treading on each other's toes, or we shouldn't be treading on each other's toes, because we've got different skill sets. So we are complementary. So if that's one element. The reward system is such that if people bring work, they get rewarded for the bringing work. If they share work, um, they get rewarded for that. They're a group of people who I would say are, in some of the categories that I've talked earlier, relatively straightforward, not relatively straightforward, totally straightforward, fun people. So it's fun to be in the group, just regardless of whether we're working together. They're straightforward. So if there are challenges, we can talk them through. They've got relevant complementary skill sets, and the incentives are for collaboration. So I suppose the venture is, to a certain extent, me pulling together the learnings I've had over the years and think about what makes good teams, and then with a view that we meet clients and we work with clients who want that unified team, and that client is also part of the team, if that makes sense. I think that certainly I enjoyed as an in-house lawyer to work with an external lawyer, where it really felt like there's a continuation here from the business people to the in-house lawyers to the external lawyers. We were all really working on the same challenge here, and we just happen to have different roles in different organizations. But if the goal is the thing, and we keep that goal in mind, we should go well.
You mentioned a short while ago COVID, and COVID probably accelerated workplaces adopting more agile remote working practices. I know perhaps a pullback to more in office and in some areas, but do you notice that had an impact on how effectively people could collaborate? Did it make things better, worse, just different?
I, my feeling is that the change was a bit made collaboration a bit harder, because people weren't quite used to the communication tools and not working together. And I suspect there's still places in which, frankly, but it's not just Zoom calls or team calls that need a bit of extra thought. People use emails, and people think they're collaborating when they copy 25 people into an email, or when they don't copy anyone's email or copy the wrong people. So there are, I suppose you could say, well, even physical or being proximate looks like it's easier to collaborate, but maybe there's inefficiencies there as well, and people aren't at their best levels. They don't like the group dynamic. So I think it's more about learning how to use particular tools, particular communication tools for collaboration. That would be probably the way I'd think of it. And I guess when we first on team, I guess I'd be on calls sometimes with 15 people, and 3 people would spend most of the time talking, and 3 people would never talk at all. Things like, I guess, the leader recognizing, the more introvert people won't speak, the more extrovert people will always speak. And I think perhaps there's an opportunity for a leader to use remote working be quite mindful about how you do that, because having 200 people on the calls might look like great collaboration, but might be quite inefficient in terms of if collaboration is for a purpose, if the goal is whatever it is, to be a successful business or a happy group of people or whatever, that keeping that in mind and saying, how does this serve that, and how do we get towards that with this Zoom call or massive email chain or whatever it might be.
Yeah, you chatted earlier about the importance of listening, and that I think suppose the larger numbers, you don't feel listened to if you're not getting the signals back, and the more people you've got communicating in, it can make it harder to feel as an individual listened to. But that communication piece, I think, is interesting as well. Is there anything you've brought into your business coaching from your sports coaching in high performing teams? Because in some senses that collaborative goal and that imperative is clearer. So, but have you learned anything about how to communicate more effectively?
I mean, I think there can be this perception that sport has all these lessons for life, and I think there are the principles are probably the same. I think the difference is that in a sports team or as an individual sports, if you don't perform well as a team, the results are there. They're pretty plain to see what's going on, and if you're the pressure to perform, if we call it, or the metrics of success are more obvious, and so that tends to drive better communication and because it's so visible. Whereas I think in a workplace, it's often much less clear. The goal is much less clear, and actually, it can be unhelpful, I think, to bring the sports behavior, if you like, because people can be quite direct with one another sometimes. We're trying to win this thing. Everyone knows that if someone tells someone to go over there, we're doing it to, I don't know, cover the pitch, or if someone says you're not training as much as I'd like you to train, or you're having these difficult conversations, or you're a team down, or whatever it might be, that is clearly around the purpose of a goal. And it's probably a fairly clear, tangible goal, and everyone gets that. But in a workplace, relationships are so important that I think if you bring that direct communication that might be more acceptable in sport into a workplace, I think people can damage relationships with colleagues who aren't as motivated by the goal. Everyone's got different goals in the workplace. Here it tends to be we've all signed up to do this race, so we accept certain things. Some people are just coming in because they need to pay their mortgage, or they qualified as this thing and they're not super qualified for anything else. They're just kind of getting by, and if the leader who's got a big aspiration because they want the next promotion or whatever it might be, and they're trying to bring people along who are like, that's your goal. That's not my goal. When I heard something the other day, it was something about GDP being a measure of success. I thought it was really interesting. It was a thing in the FT, and it was someone saying that we're measuring the wrong thing. We measure GDP because what measured clearly is an economic measure of success, and yet for many people, yes, some money is important, but economic success isn't the only measure by which they judge whether, instead of talking about happiness and inclusivity and the environment, a bunch of other things that you could be measuring success by. And so I suppose that, so I'm jumping around a bit, but I think that idea, when you're in a workplace, people have got different measures of success. Back to the thing I said earlier, what people like and what's important to them as being a key thing. The people in the team in a work environment are much more likely to have different things that are important to them, different goals. And as a leader, and back to the quote about see the world through our own eyes, if you're a leader assuming that everyone else is motivated and likes the same things you do, you may not be getting the best out of people. I think ideally you're finding everyone a place where they can do what they like and do the things they're good at. That for me is what good leadership is about. So that everyone's doing their best to move towards the goal, and everyone's enjoying their time in the environment.
Probably just time for probably a couple of questions left, Jonny. You mentioned earlier about studying biology, and I was in a conversation with my children recently and came across a Charles Darwin quote. So I'm curious what you'll make of this, where he was talking about it's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. In the context of leadership and living a flourishing life, does that resonate for you?
Well, these are tricky questions. Yeah. Most adaptable to change. I think as someone who is okay with change, then I probably would agree with that. But as you all know from different sort of personality styles, there are the people that see, and let's call it safety, or through control, and there are people that see safety through adaptation. That's broadly two approaches, and the two polarities, and then people sit in the middle. So I suppose I'm okay. I've changed roles from time to time. I've changed things in my life. I enjoy, to a sense, I enjoy that change. So I think it's helpful if an environment is changing to enjoy change, if that makes sense, and be comfortable with it. But I think there are also ways to lead where something is more fixed and change isn't happening, and we can see that with certain industries that won't be changing so much. There'll be certain jobs that don't change so much. So again, I think it's where I'm going to get into some whole discussion about evolution. I'm going too deep into that question because he was obviously writing in the context of evolution and whether how much evolution is going. Things perhaps that's across generations. It's not like an individual chooses to change. That is about. No one getting into that sort of genetic change and survival. So it's quite a slow process, I suppose, evolution. But back to the original point, I think the ability to change for me, I enjoy a bit of change, and I think it helps me.
Yeah, I always thought it was a dangerous question to ask you in terms of knowing your background and the level of broader context and detail you'd have with it. But if perhaps we just finish on, if you what would be your best advice you would give to a learning leader?
I think probably what I've talked about earlier is I think just people are different. They're good at different things. Trying to get the best out of people is probably the number one thing for me, is that trying to get people doing things they like doing and the things they're good at, and to spend a bit of time trying to help them move around. And if there are opportunities to do different bits of work, I certainly always used to do that with the team I had. They would shuffle around a bit and say, "Do you want to do some of this?" And so that within some limits that clearly the business has to go forwards, and you're trying to achieve a goal. But I think that would be my advice to people, to understand about the people you're working with and get the best out of each of them.
I think that's a perfect place for us to stop. So, Jonny, thank you very much for joining me today and for entertaining my questions. I thoroughly enjoyed our discussion, and I do hope our listeners have as well.
Thanks very much, Nick.